Yes, please.
Yes.
So today we'll get started with the Terraform. Terraform is a infrastructure as a code tool, and it is helping us in infrastructure provisioning. What is meant by infrastructure provisioning tool? And it uses IAC concept. Infrastructure provisioning, it's very straightforward. That it helps in creating the infrastructure, right? We can, like, till now we were creating infrastructure from the AWS console and all, but now Terraform comes in, which can help us creating the infrastructure. And it uses the concept of IAC. IAC means infrastructure as a code concept. What is meant by infrastructure as a code? Any idea? Anyone? Have you heard about it? What is infrastructure as a code concept? Yes. Okay. Infrastructure as a code is nothing but like we know that the developers write the code to develop the to develop the application, and testers write some test scripts for automation testing. Similarly, writing a code which can manage the infrastructure is nothing but infrastructure as a code concept. Like we look at the infrastructure in the form of code. We work with the infrastructure in the form of code. Right, that's how it works. An infrastructure code, this is written in, particularly for Terraform, it's written in HashiCorp language, which is HCL. And it's open source and uses declarative language. It helps in infrastructure provisioning. So that's what infrastructure as code Terraform works. It's an open source and uses declarative language. It's used for provisioning, modifying, replicating the infrastructure. Let's say you have an infrastructure in dev, you want to replicate it. Yes, that's possible. Let's say you have an infrastructure, you want to upgrade it or you want to modify it. Yes, that is possible. And even destroying the infrastructure effectively with Terraform is possible. Right, these are all the things which Terraform does, and there's a lot of confusion or like a misunderstanding with the concept of Ansible. Both works almost similarly, and there is overlap of what each other does, and hence the confusion. Ansible is a configuration management tool. Terraform is an infrastructure provisioning tool. Provisioning means Terraform can help you in creating the infrastructure, in creating your environment. And once it is created, Ansible can configure it. That's the actual difference, and that's how they should be used. But there's a lot of overlap. Like each can work for vice versa as well. Means Terraform can also be used for configuration management. Ansible can be used for infrastructure provisioning, and that leads to some confusions, right? But the best way to utilize is, like, you may be asking or you may be having a question, which one to use. A combination should be used, not either Ansible or Terraform, but always like a combination should be used. Infrastructure for provisioning and configuration management for configuring the infra. In Terraform is obviously a new tool compared to Ansible, but now it's matured enough. This slide is prepared some a year or 2 years back. At that point of time, it's a bit new, but now it's quite mature, we would say. Ansible, of course, is older than Terraform. It should be confined for configuration management because that's where its strength lies. And Terraform should be used for infrastructure provisioning. But both uses the concept of infrastructure as a code. Like we use the code to manage the infra, to maintain the infra, to configure or to modify the infra. And Ansible is a product from Red Hat, whereas Terraform is from HCL. And if you see the components, there were two core components. This is the core component, like Terraform's core component, and providers. These are the two components of Terraform, two important components of Terraform. And core takes two inputs, Terraform config files and Terraform state file. Means, see, this comes under the architecture. Let us understand first two components, core and providers, and then we'll talk about the architecture. We'll get into this architecture. Before we go on, any questions from anyone?
No.
Okay. So let's get into the architecture now. Like I said, it has got two components, core and provider. What is a core? As the name says, it's a core component, which is taking care of the process of execution. And it will take two inputs. The first one is Terraform configuration. Second one is the state. So core takes two inputs. One is Terraform config file, which as a Terraform user we create. I'll create a Terraform config file as a Terraform user. So it will take this input, which will have the expected state of the infrastructure. What is meant by expected state of the infrastructure? Expected state of the infrastructure is nothing but like what you want to have. Let's say I want to have two EC2 instances, right? That's the expected state of the infra. To EC2. Right? So this is the expected state of the infra, which is present in the Terraform config files. As a user, we do that, and it will take this input, and it will also compare the Terraform state file. Terraform state file is created on the first application or the first run of Terraform apply command. Means whenever you apply your config files, for the first, of course, for every run, state file gets updated. And for the first time, when you run Terraform apply, this state file will be created, which will have the actual state of the infra. Means like once it is created, it will have that information, actual state of the infra. This is the expected state of the infra. So core takes these two as an inputs, compare them, compare the expected state, actual state, and it creates a plan. Plan is like a document which will have all the steps of how the infrastructure should be, right? So it will have all the documents, all the plan, like what should be done to achieve this actual state. It will compare both of them. It will come out with the steps, what should be done to achieve the actual state. Let's say there were two, means you are expecting two. There is actually only one EC2 instance. So it will make sure, or else this document will have, it will prepare a document with the steps to create one more instance. This document is called Terraform plan. Terraform plan is a document which will have all the steps that are needed to achieve the infra, right? So then comes the providers. There were different providers like AWS provider, GCP provider, Azure, Kubernetes, and so on. There are different providers. These providers will help you achieve the infrastructure. Means, okay, plan is created, but how do you implement, or how do you achieve that actual state? That's where providers comes in. You can consider providers like an add-on or executables, right? Which would be communicating with the different APIs. Like let's say AWS, you want to create some infra on AWS. It will connect with the AWS and create that infra. Means it will help you. Provider is like an exe or a program which will help you to connect with that AWS API and create the infra. So there are like hundreds of providers. Each provider gives you access to again thousands of resources. Like using this AWS provider, you can connect or you can manage different EC2 instances, EKS, and so on. So that's how it works. The core components, I mean the two components, core and the provider. Any questions in the architecture? Is the architecture clear?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Okay. All right. So then comes the Terraform setup. Terraform works on multiple operating systems like Windows, Linux, Mac, and so on. So we'll go for the Terraform setup and then we'll talk about these providers. But before jumping in there, let me show you this providers once. Terraform providers. There is a registry where Terraform providers are stored. Yeah. So this is the Terraform registry.terraform.io, where you have all the providers. Providers are a logical abstraction of an upstream API. They're responsible for understanding API interactions and reducing and exposing the resources. Like you have, these are all the different providers, right? So these are all the different providers. And if you go here, lifecycle management of AWS resources. Here is the providers, like where you can look at the life cycle of different resources. Here you can see, and this is the documentation. Like I said, this is like a executable. This is the code to download the provider. This is how you download the provider and use it. And if you go here, yes, this is the AWS provider. And how to use the provider and all will say this is how you use the provider. And here, see, like I told you, there are hundreds of provider. Each provider gives access to hundreds of resources. These are all the resources which it gives access, like EC2, VPC, S3 bucket, CKS, all of that resource means you can manage using these resources. You can manage that particular service using these resources. See, these are all the different providers. Majority, I mean, these are the official ones created and managed by HashiCorp. There are also partner provided ones. So these are all the list of the providers. And if you click each provider, you will have the details of them. If you know how to use one provider, others would be similar. We will see how to install these providers and all. So let's get to Terraform setup.